My name is Isla Richardson, and my life has been all over the place. Anyways, this is my Draw My Life. I was born in New York in July of 2000. I'm the youngest of two children with a brother who is 4 years older than me. My family moved around the US. They went from Pennsylvania to Philadelphia to Virginia, and then to the big city of New York. Moving was never a foreign idea, so they weren't surprised when the life of my brother and I was unlike the ones they had led as children. One with constant moving and the constant knowledge that things weren't permanent. But they definitely did not know that they would have to leave everything we knew behind and never turn back. When I was barely 2 years old, we moved for the first time from New York to LA. It wasn't anything that my family had not previously experienced, so my mom went with no hesitation in plans for our family vacations. I went to my first school there, and well, I never realized how easy it was to make friends when you were young. Like, you just went over to people and said hi and you were instantly best friends. It was actually how I met my childhood friend, the friend I go to college with. Anyways, I fit in easily at that school. It wasn't bad at all. LA was amazing. When I was 6 years old, we moved again, to Orlando, and once again, the same thing. I had friends within an instant, and it was all fine. We went to Disneyland together, and we had no care in the world. We were so young back then. It was all just a whole lot easier. Looking back at it now, as we grow up, we complicate things and start caring about who likes who, deciding who we're going to like back based on other people. Back to the story. One day, about 5 years later, my dad came home with a worried look. He was scared of the news that he had to deliver, as it would later cause tension in the family for 4 months. We were being told that we had to move, but this time, it wasn't domestic. We were moving to London. This changed a lot of things. Suddenly, my dad was working longer hours at work, my parents were constantly fighting, and then they left for 2 weeks on an exploratory trip. Then, my dad left 3 months before we did, and it caused chaos around our house. The usually happy and loving environment became a sad one, and was drenched in the memories of the things that once were, especially since all of our things were gone. My brother, who was 15 at the time, was incredibly sad and didn't want to go. He was a freshman already, so it would completely change his life. I, on the other hand, was okay with it, because I thought I would just make friends once again as easily as I did the last time. I was sorely mistaken. We moved there in July, and things were slowly turning up. My parents were better, the family was incredibly close, and we loved everything about London. Once school started, it all changed. It took time, but we were back to normality. We just found that life wasn't as different, because we were all together. My brother was having a harder time. The studies were harder, and everyone already had a friend group, and he wasn't the popular football guy anymore, and was just another one of the guys. For me, it was more or less the same. I was the new girl in the group of individuals that knew each other since they were 5, but after a week, I found my friend group. In that group, I also found my best friend, another expatriate who understood what was going on in my life. She's still my best friend to this day. Through this time, I gained a very noticeable British accent. I started to love tea, and I just did London things. Looking back at it now, I realized that the transition from the US to the UK was not as impactful as others, as a great amount of our cultures are alike, and it was easier to fit in and connect with the people and activities there. I was in the prime of my teenage years, and I was constantly changing, and popularity was just one of those things that I would die without. So I found a new hobby. I started playing sports. I turned to the arts and many more things. All of these things giving me a place in which I felt safe and I was able to express myself through different aspects of my life. It shaped who I was in many ways. I started playing volleyball and basketball, and I started in school productions, therefore establishing my popularity. We spent 4 years there. My brother graduated. We got used to life in England, so my brother went to a university at London. It was our new home. We all loved it. It was some of the best wonderful years of my life. I found my best friend, and we were all happy. My brother still lives with us, and we formed a close bond. Regarding my social life, as I got better at sports over time, it became my motivation. But as people say, it was the calm before the storm. My self-esteem was at its highest point. I was keeping a healthy relationship with my body due to the sports, and was getting proper sleep and food. I was thriving. Being a starter for both sports teams and getting constant recognition from coaches and peers, well, I was scared of what would happen to my popularity, who would take my place, and so many more things. I think the move from London was the most impactful. especially since I was roaring with hormones, becoming sassy, and eventually thinking that I ruled the world. I was as opinionated as ever, and I thought I knew better than everybody, and had had many experiences that had built me into who I am. We moved again in 2015, to a completely new place, Hong Kong. It was absolutely crazy there. We were 3 instead of 4, we didn't speak the language, there were millions of people. It was a huge mess. It was probably the most stressful month of my life. We lived in a hotel for 4 months. Our apartment was incredibly small. Nothing fit, and I didn't really fit in. The culture of Hong Kong was so different from that in London and the US. I was in culture shock. I didn't know how to act outside or what to eat and just relied on others to do things for me. I didn't socialize with Chinese people because it was uncomfortable. I had no control over anything. I felt pretty much useless. The sports teams were different, way more strict, yet of a lower skill level than the one in London. But it was useful because it was the only way in which I connected with people and met others. Since moving to Hong Kong, everything seemed different. I was moving every year up until my graduation. Hong Kong during my sophomore year, Singapore during my junior year, and finally, Rotterdam during my senior year. It pretty much went the same every time. I got there, made friends, got comfortable, joined sports and activities, started talking the language, and moved. I was lonely. I had no one because no one knew me for longer than 12 months. I didn't belong. I had no roots at all, no motivation, and eventually gained an uncontrollable fear of attachment because I thought I would lose everyone. The expatriate life just wasn't for me, especially not at that age. The senior year is supposed to be the most special year because you're surrounded by the people you love, but I was surrounded by new people in a new school in an unknown school system. These 3 changes over a 3-year period changed my personality. I was more closed off in comparison to the outgoing girl I once was. I removed myself from uncomfortable situations, and I had a harder time in school because I found that concentration was hard. My motivation was shattered, and so many other things. Anxiety became a noticeable part of my life. More specifically, social anxiety. I was scared that I would never fit in, so I avoided social interaction and prevented myself from going to house parties and getting to know people. I was suddenly more conscious of my differences, and they built up a big wall around me, and there was no penetrating it. I tend to focus on the negative, but the fact is, I found a new independence that gave me a freedom of choices that I hadn't had before. I learned not to depend on people's opinion and developed adaptation skills to cope with loss and many more things. But this also helped me find myself, to fully understand who I was and who I wanted to be. I identify as a British person, but I'm also an American, so I pretty much had the idea of where I was headed for college. I knew I wanted to return to a place I could call my home, somewhere where I wouldn't grow restless and that I belonged. I had great opportunities for colleges as I was top of my class, especially with impressive grades and a salutatorian title, which got me accepted into universities such as UCLA and NYU with an undergraduate program in sociology. I applied only to prestigious schools in places that I knew. I just knew that I wanted to go back home. Well, one of my homes. I think it's safe to say that I got into sociology because of my experience. Sociology has fields that correlate with those regarding third culture kids. I wanted to give to those people who went through the same experiences as I did. My battle with anxiety, stress, and self-image was one that I am aware plenty of people around the world experience. The panic of moving, the first day, the anxiety of catching up with everyone around the world and locally. But it's still not enough, and I don't think it will ever be. It was like a giant circle. I ended where I started, with one move to my city of birth. Of course, I was worried that I wasn't going to fit in. I wasn't the smartest or the most talented, especially not in those prestigious schools such as NYU. Starting school, I realized how natural it felt to be with people of my same culture, but I think that school felt like home because it wasn't just Americans. There were Chinese, Singaporeans, British, Dutch people, and it was like all my homes came together at last. I know that I don't only belong in one place. I know that I am not only of one culture. I know the importance of being true to myself. I have been given millions of opportunities throughout my life, but I have faced challenges unlike many others, but they have made me who I am. And this was me drawing my life.